In 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott was organized by civil rights activists to desegregate public transportation in Alabama after Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give her seat to a white man on a bus. The boycott was a pivotal turning point to the civil rights movement that would eventually lead to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, ending the conflict of segregation in public places. The reason the boycott was formed was to get rid of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was the name given to any laws that enforced segregation. They started to appear in 1877 during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. White people still found ways to keep boundaries between themselves and African Americans through segregation. But the U.S. government did little to stop Jim Crow in the United States and upheld the laws that were created after the Civil War. There were previously no consistent forms of segregation between 1863 and 1877 because African Americans listened to what white people told them as if they were still under the command, even though they were free. They stayed in the place society had assigned to them. Many civil rights activists wanted to get rid of Jim Crow laws that had been around for almost 100 years. This resulted in the start of the boycott. One of them was Rosa Parks. She refused to give up her seat to a white passenger and was arrested for it. The same bus driver that had kicked Rosa Parks off a bus many years earlier was also driving the bus the day she was arrested. She sat in the middle section of the bus with 35 other passengers, black and white. A white man boarded the bus, and the driver demanded for the first few rows of seats behind the white section to be emptied. The other African American passengers gave up their seats, but Rosa did not. She thought it was unfair that she and 3 other people had to stand up so one man could sit. She was tired of doing things for white people and not having the same things done for her. Another civil rights activist involved in the boycott was Martin Luther King Jr. He organized the boycott. King moved with his wife, Coretta, to Montgomery to be a minister. His family had many civil rights activists and preachers. He had been a pastor for about a year when he and the civil rights group in Montgomery, Alabama, decided to act on the incident of Rosa Parks' arrest because she refused to give up her seat. King wanted to protest, but he wanted to do it peacefully, like Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "There is no other way to change the way things are but protest. We have been patient and have waited many years. We have hidden our feelings to please the white people who believe they are above us because of the color of their skin. But we are here to learn that we shouldn't be patient with anything less than liberty and justice." King said that he was done with being oppressed and being treated unfairly. He said that all African Americans were getting tired with segregation. After Rosa Parks' arrest, civil rights activists formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, the MIA, to boycott the buses. They made King their leader, and he was a good choice because he was still young and new to the town. If the boycott failed, he would go back to being a pastor. King continued with his civil rights career after the boycott and helped found the Southern Christianship Leadership Conference. His book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story, also helped build his fame. Because many people disagreed with what King believed in, his house was bombed many times and was assassinated on April 4, 1968. He was arguably one of the most influential civil rights leaders ever in the United States and gave one of the most famous speeches ever known, "I Have a Dream," in 1963. Joanne Robinson was another civil rights activist who handed out leaflets that told people not to ride the bus. One day before the boycott, she was going home for Christmas break on a segregated bus. When she was imagining what her time would be like reunited with her loved ones, the driver stopped the bus and told her she had to move. Robinson was confused and didn't understand what was going on at first. Then she understood the bus driver was yelling at her. He told her to stand up and get off while holding his arm like he was going to beat her. She ran off the bus crying. Her crime? She had sat in one of the first 10 rows, which were reserved for whites. This event motivated her to help get rid of Jim Crow laws in the United States. Joanne Robinson contributed to the boycott by writing leaflets asking African Americans to participate, which was originally supposed to be one day. There were more than 50,000 passed out in total. E.D. Nixon was a civil rights activist who said that the ministers were not acting brave like they should be. He said now it was time to be like men. He said, "Let me tell you gentlemen one thing. You ministers have lived off the sweat of these washerwomen for the last 100 years and ain't never done nothing for them. I'm just ashamed of you." He told them that they were acting like little boys. "We've worn aprons all our lives. It's time to take the aprons off. If we're gonna be men's, now it's time to be men's." He was the NAAC president and fought for equal rights for African Americans against Jim Crow laws. He busted Rosa Parks out of jail with Clifford Durr on December 1st. Nixon then convinced Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to help him organize a bus boycott that would last for the duration of one day. Before the boycott, the court case Plessy v. Ferguson happened in 1896. All trains were operated by the state, went by the separate but equal standard. This prohibited passengers of different races to sit together. A group of professionals formed the Citizens Committee to test the constitutionality of the Separate Car Act in 1891. They wanted to choose a person of mixed race to support the claim that the law didn't always work because you couldn't say where someone should sit if they are mixed race. Plessy, who was 7/8 white and 1/8 black, bought a first-class ticket to ride on a train in the section reserved for white passengers. He was arrested after he wouldn't give up his seat and go to the colored section because he was violating the Separate Car Act. The judge dismissed the idea that the act was unconstitutional and enraged many African Americans. The court case Brown v. Board of Education ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional on May 17th. On February 23rd, E.D. Nixon organized a political forum through the Progressive Democratic Association. This was to ask white candidates about their bus seating policies, insufficient representation for African Americans, and other issues. On March 2nd, Claudette Colvin was arrested for not giving up her seat. She said that it was her constitutional right as an American citizen to sit in whatever seat she wanted to, but because she was pregnant, the NAACP didn't look at her case any further. Civil rights activists met with city and bus officials to change seating on public buses. After the discussion went downhill, Joanne Robinson mentions the idea of a boycott. On May 31st, the Supreme Court says to desegregate schools in the Brown v. Board of Education case. Then, the kickoff moment that would lead to the start of the boycott. On December 1st, Rosa Parks is arrested for not giving up her seat, and E.D. Nixon busts her out of jail. The next day, civil rights activists make plans to protest to improve riding conditions for African Americans. Leaflets written by Joanne Robinson containing information about the boycott were passed out by the Women's Political Council. E.D. Nixon and Joanne Robinson were waiting for the example they could use to challenge the policy of segregation on buses in court. They knew that African American women were most of the bus riders, but they needed the perfect person. They decided to use Rosa Parks for the part. The boycott is decided to continue until the policies on the bus are changed. December 5th was the first day of the boycott, and Rosa Parks was also fined in court. On December 8th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, the Alabama Council on Human Rights, Montgomery Improvement Association, city commissioners, and the bus company arrange a meeting. On December 13th, a carpool system appears to help African Americans who are boycotting and is run by volunteers from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. On January 21st, the end of the boycott is falsely announced. On January 26th, King's home is bombed, but he asked everyone not to seek vengeance. On February 1st, Browder v. Gale challenged the constitutionality of segregation in lawsuit form, and E.D. Nixon's home was bombed. On March 19th, Martin Luther King Jr. is appointed as the leader of the boycott. On June 5th, the Federal District Court rules that segregation is unconstitutional in Browder v. Gale. Over the course of the boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. reminded the people that the boycott was about fighting for equal rights and not to shut down the bus company. Many people walked for more than just themselves during the boycott. They walked for a better future. The white police tried to stop the boycotters at all costs, even pulling the carpoolers over constantly and arresting them. Finally, after 381 days, on December 21st, the bus system in Montgomery was now required to have integrated buses, and the boycott ended. In conclusion, Jim Crow laws that legalized segregation were unconstitutional. Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board of Education helped get the boycott started because African Americans wanted desegregation everywhere and wanted to be seen and treated as equal. The civil rights activists and boycotters that helped all gave personal sacrifices for a better future. There were many hardships faced that included mental and physical pain, but the cause was for something greater and for a better America.